Jake is being manipulated by Quaritch, Selfridge and the rest of the military section of the mining operation. Grace decides to take her operation out of Dodge. She moves them into the Hallelujah Mountains, a remote region of immense, floating islands that are sacred to the Na'vi and are also rich in unobtainium. Grace wants her turf away from the RDA officials and military types at the base. In his next video log, Jake discusses his language lessons and says his time with the Na'vi is like field stripping a weapon. Enough repetition and you can't help but learn it. This is intercut with scenes of his continued training with Neytiri, who teaches him about the Na'vi-Forest connection. She tells Jake that all energy is borrowed in one day. We have to give it back. Jake seems to comprehend this, and as he says a prayer for an animal he hunted and just killed, Neytiri says that he is ready for an important rite of passage, to bond with and ride a Declan, a flying mountain banshee. To reach the banshee's nesting grounds, Jake must accompany Neytiri, Sute and 2 other Na'vi trainees to the highest region of the Hallelujah Mountains. Several factors, the height, the ferocity of the untamed banshees, make this a dangerous lesson, but Jake's lack of fear and successful bond with his banshee earn him the grudging respect of the Na'vi warriors present, even Sute. He makes the bond with the tendrils in his queue, and as he rides the flying animal he remarks that he's not much of a horseman but he was born to do this. Jake, Neytiri and the others ride together to the Tree of Souls, the most sacred place to the Na'vi. While flying on a hunting sortie, Jake and Neytiri are suddenly pursued and attacked by a creature known to the Na'vi as Toruk, a giant and brightly colored flying mountain banshee with murderous intentions toward everything that flies. Neytiri says its name means last shadow. The Toruk's shadow, once seen, is usually the last shadow one ever gets to see, as its attack is almost always fatal. Back at Home Tree, Neytiri shows Jake the skeleton of a precursor of the present Toruk. She tells him the last person to ride a Toruk was her grandfather's grandfather, who used the animal to unite the 5 Na'vi tribes in a time of great sorrow. Such a person would earn the title Toruk motto, Rider of the Last Shadow. When Jake comes back to his human form, it's clear he's been changed by this latest experience, for he says, out there is the real world, in here is the dream. The colonel comes over to him to tell him his mission is accomplished and he's to return to Earth that day. And good to his word, the colonel has arranged for Jake to get the treatment he needs to regain use of his legs. Jake wishes to delay his departure because he says he's right at the point at which he's to be initiated into the tribe and accepted as one of them and then would have the status to negotiate with the Na'vi to relocate. The colonel acquiesces. Jake attends a Na'vi ceremony, where he learns the Na'vi believe that every person can be born twice. Neytiri leads Jake to a place of prayer, the Tree of Voices, where they use their cues to bond with the tree. Neytiri tells Jake he can make a bow from the tree, and that he can choose a woman. Jake tells Neytiri that he has already chosen her, and she says that she has chosen him. They sleep together under the tree and Jake wakes up back in the lab. In the morning, Neytiri awakens to falling trees, then the presence of bulldozers. Soldiers are advancing as the forest falls around Neytiri, who is dragging and carrying Jake to safety. At their remote spot, Jake is getting ready to link with his avatar, and when he finally revives, Jake climbs onto one of the bulldozers and tries to stop it, eventually smashing its camera system and drawing some gunfire. Other Na'vi warriors arrive, while the colonel, reviewing films back at the base, recognizes Jake in his avatar form as the person who tried to stop their mission. The bulldozers continue their operation, wiping out the sacred ground. At Home Tree, the Na'vi want war. Grace and Jake argue against it. There's an intense debate. Sute tries to kill Jake, jealous at having learned that Jake and Neytiri are mated for life when he and Neytiri were betrothed. Jake declares he is an Na'vi and deserves the right to speak. Suddenly, both Grace and Jake's avatars fall unconscious as the links between them and their human forms are abruptly broken by the enraged colonel, who arrests Jake for trying to stop the bulldozers. Grace and Jake face off with RDA and military brass. Grace reveals that Pandora's trees form a network that has more neural connections than exist in. Be allowed to return to the Omaticaya to try to convince them to leave, and he's granted 1 hour to achieve that objective. Jake and Grace are not welcomed back. Neytiri rejects Jake. Both Jake and Grace are bound and left behind by the Omaticaya, who are preparing to fight against the humans, who have arrived in a large fleet of flying ships. The fleet launches gas canisters into Home Tree and the surrounding area. As the battle escalates, most of the weaponry is targeted at the root structure of Home Tree, which is toppled by a series of explosions and heavy artillery. Many Omaticaya are killed. Moat frees Jake and Grace and asks them to save the tribe. Jake arrives and is rejected again by Neytiri when he tries to console her. Neytiri's father Atukon is killed by a large piece of shrapnel. His dying wish is for Neytiri to take his sacred bow and assume leadership of their people. The destruction seems endless, and, suddenly, Jake and Grace return to their human bodies and are promptly placed under arrest for treason. Norm is also arrested for trying to prevent soldiers from disabling their avatar forms. The Na'vi gather at the Tree of Souls. Trudy arrives at the cell which holds Jake, Grace, and Norm. She dupes their guard by saying she wants nothing to do with them, only to knock out the guard an instant later. As they prepare to flee the base, Grace is shot and wounded by the colonel. The team flies Trudy's ship to the remote lab in the floating mountains and they take a pod to another spot in the forest. Jake returns to his avatar body. The hopeful reunion with the Omadakaya is not to be, initially. Jake is an outcast, an alien. So he makes a bold decision. He realizes that to regain the trust of the Na'vi, he has to take things to a higher level. He summons his Banshee and sets off to find the Toruk. His strategy is simple but can easily result in death. Jake believes that the Toruk never looks for an attack above himself and thus he can be approached that way. Jake jumps off his Banshee and onto the back of the Toruk. We next see him arrive riding the Toruk at the Tree of Souls in the middle of an Omadakayan ceremony. Jake has successfully bonded with the Toruk. The Omadakaya are stunned to see their greatest legend come true. Jake dismounts and makes his way through the crowd of Na'vi, who, awed, part before him. When he reaches Neytiri, each holds out an arm to the other and she says I see you. Tsute, who is now tribe leader, concedes Jake's new role of Toruk motto. He accords Jake much respect. Jake convinces Moat to help Grace, who is dying. Moat begins the preparations, which involve getting Grace's human and avatar bodies in place at the Tree of Souls. The idea is to permanently transfer Grace's consciousness to her avatar. Moat lets it be known that Grace must pass through the Eye of Iwa, and that the Great Mother might choose to let her pass through to her avatar self or she might opt to have Grace remain with her. The ritual is not successful, though before she dies, Grace tells Jake that she has seen Iwa. Jake, heartbroken and furious, speaks his Toruk motto and says it's time to send a message to the Sky people that this is the Na'vi's land. But to do so, they first must go to each of the Na'vi clans to ask them to come and fight as one. Tsute will be the Omadakayan's new clan leader and will also help rally other clans to fight with them. The human military have picked up the infusion of Na'vi into the area, from a few hundred to 2,000 within a day. At this rate, the colonel says as he addresses his troops, the Na'vi will soon total 20,000, at which point their perimeter will be overrun. Rather than let that happen, he continues, they must stage a preemptive attack while they still can. Their plan is to turn a space shuttle into the carrier of a massive bomb. Their target is the Tree of Souls, and the attack is planned for 0600 the next day. They believe that if they destroy the Tree of Souls, the Na'vi will go away and never come near this place again. Jake is busy rallying the Omadakaya. At the Tree of Souls, he uses his cue to bond with the tree and asks Iwa to look into Grace's memories, stressing that humankind killed their mother, Earth, the entity that protects the balance of life. Neytiri appears and tells Jake that Iwa does not take sides. Quaritch masses his fleet, mostly as protection for the Valkyrie shuttle. The bomb ship and the fleet move toward the Tree of Souls. The united Na'vi force begins to arrive from the sky and on the ground. Jake on his Toruk, Tsute, and other warriors engage in battle with the military aircraft, mainly Scorpion assault ships. Casualties mount on both sides. The gunships have unmatched firepower, but are no match for the Declans, who grab hold of them and smash them against each other. Jake, riding the Toruk, is pursued and shot at by Colonel Quaritch's Dragonfly ship. Trudy arrives and open fire on the Colonel's command ship. Neytiri's Banshee is shot down and killed. Norm's avatar is mortally wounded and he jumps back to his human form. Tsute takes on the bomb ship and is killed in the attempt. Trudy dies when her ship is destroyed in a hail of gunfire from Quaritch's Dragonfly. Neytiri watches this action from the ground. Jake attempts to contact Tsute and is unsuccessful, as is his attempt to reach Trudy. Meanwhile, the bomb ship closes in on the Tree of Souls. Jake tells Neytiri via communicator to disengage from the fight. Suddenly, through what's left of the surrounding forest, a battalion of Titanitares, Pandora's heavily armored dinosaur-like animals, arrives and engages the Earth forces. They quickly lay waste to infantry and soldiers in AMP suits. Overjoyed that Iwa has heard Jake's plea for help, Neytiri rejoins the fight with many other of Pandora's species behind her. When a Thanator appears nearby, it bows to her submissively. Jake and his Toruk take to the sky to confront the bomb ship as the military's ground forces retreat in disarray. Approaching from above, Jake grenades the bomb ship. It crashes in flames and explosions well away from the Tree of Souls. Jake also throws explosives into vulnerable parts of the command ship. It begins to burn and go down. Colonel Quaritch puts on an AMP suit and jumps free of the command ship before it disintegrates in a ball of flames. He finds himself at the temporary camp set up by Grace. In the camp, Jake is inside his avatar pod. Quaritch, set on killing Jake, is now attacked by a Thanator that Neytiri had bonded with and ridden to the site. With the aid of his AMP suit, the Colonel kills the Thanator and Neytiri is trapped underneath it. Before the Colonel has a chance to kill Neytiri, Jake arrives in his avatar. The two engage in combat, the Colonel in his AMP suit and Jake as his avatar, armed only with a piece of pipe. Jake smashes the suit's plastic canopy, the Colonel pops it off, dons a breathing mask, and, before he moves off toward the structures that house the pods, asks Jake how it feels to have betrayed his race. "You think you're one of them? Time to wake up," he taunts, as he smashes into the mobile lab, looking for Jake's pod, intent on destroying it and human Jake. The battle resumes. Jake is grabbed by an arm of the AMP suit and hangs from his queue before the Colonel. Meanwhile, Neytiri has almost freed herself. The Colonel now moves Jake closer to him and reaches for his knife, intending to finish Jake by slitting his throat. Suddenly, Neytiri shoots an arrow at the Colonel, impaling him through the center of his chest. The Colonel, reeling, is unable to continue his attack on Jake. Neytiri's second arrow lodges right next to the first. It brings the Colonel in the AMP suit to the ground. However, much damage has been done to the lab, which is leaking in the planet's poisonous atmosphere. Human Jake is awake but having difficulty both breathing and trying to get a mask on. Neytiri arrives and helps Jake on with his mask. Cradling human Jake, she says, "I see you." It's the first time they have seen each other face to face. Back at Hell's Gate, most of the remaining humans are being marched into a shuttle to be sent back to Earth. However, a select few Earth people, such as Norman Dr. Patel, are invited to stay on Pandora. Jake signs off in his final video log, where we learn that he has chosen to transfer his consciousness to his avatar for good. In a ceremony similar to Grace's, Jake passes through the Eye of Iwa, and wakes up in his avatar with Neytiri watching over him. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.